Welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for taking the time out of your day to join us for information about the West Reserve Drive Corridor Planning Study. We're appreciative of your willingness to participate in this virtual platform. Before we get started, I'll go over a couple housekeeping items. We'll be fielding questions using the Q&A function. That's the button that looks like speech bubbles on the bottom of your screen. Questions that are applicable to the general public will be addressed live during this meeting. To have an accurate record of all of your feedback, we do need to funnel all questions and comments through that Q&A function and won't be using the raise hand tool for today's meeting. Following the meeting, you're also welcome to offer thoughts and ask questions using the contact information provided at the end of the presentation. And finally, it's important to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be added to the study website for future reference or for anyone who wasn't able to attend today. All of MDT's efforts, including corridor planning studies like this one, contribute toward the goal of Vision Zero, working towards zero fatalities and zero serious injuries on Montana roads. This meeting is held pursuant to Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ensures that no person shall be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination on the basis of a protected status under any MDT program or activity. So presenting today, we have both MDT and consultant team members. My name is Lisa Olmstead. I'll be facilitating. I'm part of the DOW consultant team, along with Cody Salo, who is the DOW project manager. With MDT, Vicki Cernich is the corridor planning study project manager. Jacqueline Smith, also with MDT, is here to answer questions related to the Missoula district. And with that, I will pass the baton to Bob Vosen, Missoula District Administrator, to give you an introduction to the corridor study.
Thanks, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. I again want to thank you for joining us this evening. Glad we're able to bring the information forward. It's exciting information for those of us that reside in the Flathead Valley. As Lisa said, I'm Bob Vosen. I'm the District Administrator for District 1, which is Western Montana. That being said, I do reside in the Flathead Valley. Got a daughter that goes to Flathead High, so go Braves. And I use this route on a regular basis. I'm fully aware of the challenges, the concerns, and the need for improvements in the area. Kalispell, the Flathead Valley are experiencing tremendous growth, especially the areas north of Reserve Street. So we recognize that. This study will talk about that recognition and what the study has provided us as far as information and helping us to guide us to the right decisions as we improve the corridor. And so tonight we're going to cover a few things. We're going to basically review the goals and the purpose of this study. I know that everybody, when you hear that MDT is going to do something with Reserve Street, you get excited, and then you hear that it's going to be a study, and you can just hear the collective groan from everyone. Why are we studying this? We know what the problem is. So we'll get into the study and why it's necessary, how it helps actually to facilitate the process and helps us to be able to expedite a project in the future. It best sets us up for being able to move forward once we do find a funding solution and what that'll look like, but it helps us to position ourselves to make sure that we're making the right decision and that we can do something in as timely a manner as possible. We'll provide an overview today of the existing features, the traffic conditions, and some information just to help everyone have an understanding of the additional challenges beyond just the congestion that people know is there. We also will be reviewing the study findings and the recommendations and how this study is helping us to basically set the next steps as we go forward. And then at the end, we will have that Q&A process. So we'll be able to open it up to questions that everyone will have. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki, and she's going to talk about the planning study process. So go ahead, Vicki.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to do a quick overview about the planning study process and the purpose of the corridor study and where we're at in the schedule. So what is a corridor study? Well, it's a planning study. It's not a project. As you can see on this slide, it's This is a little timeline of how transportation projects move forward, and we're squarely in planning right now. So the things that corridor studies do, they're a high-level review to understand various factors and conditions. We look at social and economic and environmental effects at an early stage, and that involves conducting review of existing safety and operational and geometric conditions, and also the environmental resources to identify needs and constraints of the study corridor. And most importantly, a corridor study provides a link between early transportation planning and the environmental compliance efforts for any potential future projects that come out of the study. So the goals and the purpose of a corridor study, well, like I already said, we start with a high-level scan of the study area, and then we identify the needs and objectives through collaborative input. And that collaborative input includes a technical oversight committee, which has members of MDT staff, subject matter experts, as well as folks from the city of Kalispell and Flathead County. It included regulatory agencies at the federal, state, and local level, and it also includes the public, like why you guys are here tonight. After the needs and objectives are identified, we develop potential improvement options that meet those needs and objectives. And those improvement options include planning cost estimates, it assesses potential impacts, and the overall feasibility. An important thing to remember when we're looking at these is that we also, with the improvement options, identify short, mid, and long-term improvement options, which are helpful so you're not, so we're able to provide other solutions instead of one giant project that might take a long time to get going. The smaller projects could, maybe be done in a 2 to 5 year range. After all of that is said and done, it is all compiled. That information and data is all compiled for use in the environmental process and project development if a project moves forward. So schedule-wise, the planning study began with a review of the environmental factors and the existing projected conditions in September of 2020. This information was shared with the public and resource agencies and stakeholders to make sure that we didn't miss anything when we did our initial investigations. We asked for feedback and we received feedback during our first public information meeting in March. If you guys attended that, we had a resource agency meeting in April, and then we've had ongoing meetings with the Technical Oversight Committee through the life of this study. The input received was consulted as the needs and objectives were established for the corridor. So after the needs and objectives were developed, all of this information was used to develop the potential improvement options. All of that information is rolled up into the draft corridor study report, and that's what we're doing here tonight. It's the objective of this meeting is to share the potential improvement options with you guys and also the resource agencies and the stakeholders. You'll have a chance to and to get your comments. And following completion of the 30-day comment period, which starts today, your comments will be incorporated into the final document, and that final document will be out on MDT's website. So next, Cody is going to present a study overview, including the study findings and recommendations that have come out of the study.
All right, thanks, Vicki. I'm Cody Salo with Dell, and I am the consultant project manager who is leading the consultant team through this study and helping MDT and its partners navigate the study. So first off, let's review the corridor and its challenges and how it was determined the West Reserve Drive corridor should be a corridor study. So West Reserve Drive serves a wide range of uses, including commercial, agricultural, industrial, and residential uses. We know there's a rapid growth throughout the valley, and that's contributing to the traffic congestion, and that many of the intersections along the corridor have a lot of traffic backed up. That increase in traffic has also led to a high number of crashes along the corridor, and that's definitely a concern from us from a safety standpoint. We also know that there are major developments underway within the area, including the Rose Crossing development, and that's just in addition to all of the just background growth throughout the north end of Flathead Valley. So how was the West Reserve Corridor identified as a candidate for a corridor planning study? So as local MDT staff learn of the issues and we hear things through the public and their own observations, certain corridors are selected for the corridor study process. And this particular corridor was a prime candidate because of all the traffic and safety concerns. Corridor studies provide an opportunity to review conditions from a high level to gain a better perspective on long-term improvement and overall management into the future. So let's dig into some of the key findings and recommended improvements. We'll discuss the study area. We'll take a look at the needs and objectives that were identified for the corridor, and then ultimately how that rolled into the recommended improvement options. So first, let's take a look at the study area. The study limits extended from US 93 to the west, all the way to US 2 on the east, and we included a segment of Whitefish Stage Road for about a half-mile north of West Reserve and for several hundred feet south of West Reserve. Other local work includes a future MDT project north of the study area on Whitefish Stage Road, so we know about that. We also reviewed the study area with a buffer, so we're taking a look at least 250 feet on both sides of the road, so basically a total of 500 feet throughout that area. The study area includes everything from environmental and social factors like Vicki had mentioned. We take a look at existing physical conditions, the roadway, the drainage, the rivers, all kinds of things, biological resources, for example. And then we take a look at traffic data. So we collect information and we use that to essentially determine growth rates of traffic. In this case, we collected our own data, adjusted it for the situations with COVID and those changes that we had seen, and then compared that to other ongoing studies around the area, and actually determined that the growth rate that we would recommend was the same one that another group had recommended for the long-range transportation plan within the area. So from this foundational information, the study team determines the needs and objectives for the corridor. And this is a collaborative process with the Technical Oversight Committee and others. So there were two key needs and objectives that were identified. The first need is to improve the safety of the corridor. The number of crashes along the corridor has doubled in the last 10 years, and that is definitely a concern. So some of the key safety statistics that are worth mentioning, there were 725 total crashes in the time frame that we looked at. And what gets interesting is that 58% of those were rear end collisions. And rear end collisions often occur when there's a lot of traffic backed up. And I'm sure some of you probably know that from experience. 38% of the crashes also occurred during congested traffic conditions, primarily in that time frame when there's an evening rush hour. Between 3 and 6 p.m. in particular was a particularly bad time that we had noted. Need number two has to do with improving the corridor transportation operations. And this is a fairly broad need. So it's targeted not only at the traffic, but also at the potential to provide opportunities for other users of the roadway, including pedestrians and bicyclists. So some of those key statistics that we should be aware of, there was 2.4% growth in traffic year over year along the corridor, which is fairly high. Many of you know that. There's also projected capacity issues at all of the key intersections along the West Reserve corridor. Part of the needs and objectives collaboration is to also identify other considerations that we need to be aware of as any kind of a project may move forward. So I'll give you a few examples of that as well. We know there are numerous local plans and there are future developments underway that we need to consider. There's an LRTP underway. There are other planning efforts being done through the city and the county. We also need to consider funding availability and maintenance responsibilities when new improvements are made. We also need to be aware of the fact that there's a lot of environmental concerns. The Stillwater and Whitefish rivers are somewhat impaired at this point. And we also understand that there are stormwater requirements that would need to be considered with any type of a project or improvement. So we also understand that potential improvements may impact those folks and businesses that are adjacent to or travel the corridor. And that was one of the considerations that we looked at as we identified potential improvement options throughout the corridor. So through the needs and objectives, our team then brainstormed and looked for various ways that we could try to meet those needs through various improvements along the corridor. And so in general, there are 5 different categories that we identified as potential ways to meet some of those needs and objectives that we identified as a group. So I'll briefly review each one of those. Intersection improvements that were identified typically consist of adding additional lanes, like including turn lanes, through lanes, potentially changing the way a signal timing might operate at a particular intersection. We also looked at roadway widening, which includes, again, additional lanes, shoulders, sidewalks, other amenities along the corridor. We also reviewed from a multimodal standpoint and took a look at connectivity along the corridor to see what could be improved with that as well. We looked at travel demand management, which is essentially ways that would potentially pull people away from the corridor, which means there might be times of day that might be incentivized essentially through programs, local programs. So there's various tactics that could be used through transit as well to basically pull people away from the corridor to try to reduce some of that traffic. The other area that we looked at was access management. When we talk about access, we're talking about approaches and driveways to the corridor. And so our team reviewed approaches along the corridor and took a look at some strategies that potentially could maintain high levels of traffic operations on the corridor while improving safety. So those are the 5 categories that we looked at and generally kind of capture all of the various improvement options that we came up with. So let's get into some of the specifics. Through the corridor study process, we had some specific recommendations that we prepared through collaborative effort with the TOC. And those are all included in the draft corridor study report, which is available on the MDT website. And I highly recommend that you all spend some time on the website, find those documents. It includes the draft report, and it also includes supporting appendices with information that you can review. I'm going to discuss some of the specific recommendations that are currently in the draft study. So I'll start with the intersection improvements, and I'll go from west to east here, looking at each of these specific intersections. At the US 93 intersection, we identified the need for dual left turn lanes on the east and west legs specifically, and also some timing changes that would optimize the signal. At the Hutton Ranch Road intersection, just to the east of US 93 near the Home Depot, we identified that that particular intersection didn't need any immediate changes, but that as a widening project would go through at some point to essentially make a 5-lane facility on West Reserve Drive, that would also change that intersection and add more through lanes as well. Most of you are very familiar with the Whitefish Stage Road intersection and all the problems that it has currently. And so we have a number of specific recommended improvements as far as the types of lanes, and I'll try to be clear on all the different types we're recommending here. So the north and southbound left turn lanes need to be added to the intersection. In addition, we also found that east and southbound right turn lanes would offer benefit, along with additional through lanes on West Reserve. So that is a significant change that we would recommend, and you can read more about that in the draft corridor study report. But a significant number of new lanes are necessary at that intersection to handle that level of traffic. Looking at the US 2 intersection, we also identified quite a number of different lanes that would be potentially needed in the future. And those include dual east and northbound left turn lanes, east and southbound right turn lanes, and eventually a future westbound left turn lane at that particular intersection. So quite a few changes there as well. So you can see between all these intersections, there's a number of additional lanes that we would recommend to improve the capacity and move that traffic. So now I'll get into the roadway widening, and specifically, I'll start off with West Reserve Drive. We would recommend, and the draft corridor study will elaborate further, but we recommend a 5-lane configuration for West Reserve Drive to accommodate all the traffic that you see out there today. The draft corridor study also includes some graphics, and we won't share those tonight, but I recommend that you spend a little time reading the report and take a look at the arrangement that we've got for all the different lanes. We are showing 5 lanes with shoulders, with curb and gutter, and then each side would also include a boulevard section for snow storage and also for safety to place pedestrians and bicyclists further away from traffic. The south sidewalk is essentially more of a standard sidewalk, while the sidewalk on the north would be a wider section to accommodate more of the bicyclists that would potentially use that. It would also provide for a potential connection to a future shared use path or a bike lane or something on Whitefish Stage Road. So let's talk about the access modifications that were also noted in the draft corridor study report. Our team looked at the various approaches along West Reserve Drive, and we noted that there were some operational problems and challenges. And so we looked at ways to improve them. There are a number of specific recommendations at a handful of approaches. We also identified the need to potentially limit and then optimize certain approaches to the roadway at several locations, mainly to improve safety, but also to improve the operations to meet those needs and objectives we've identified for the corridor. One of the other recommendations is also a long-term access planning study, or something to that effect, to take a look at the corridor holistically and how best to manage all the various approaches and driveways that do access West Reserve Drive from end to end. So let's get into some of the next steps for the study process. Vicky's already elaborated on some of how this whole study process works, but I think we need to talk a little bit about what happens coming out of the corridor study. So essentially, there are several phases that we're going to move through going forward. So right now we're in the planning phase, and you can see from the graphic here that we're not done yet, and that's why we're actually here tonight. We're here to gather information and comments and questions that you might have about the corridor. So we're currently finishing up that planning stage, and the next stage that would happen is the project development phase, which is something that would follow the completion of this particular study. So what happens is MDT and its partners then consider what projects may be possible, considering funding and timelines and other constraints. And that's a collaborative effort with their other partners as well. The project development stage identifies and secures funding for specific projects and then sets timelines for the design of those projects. Finally, as the design is completed, it moves to construction following coordination with landowners, utility companies, for example, other stakeholders and partners to the project. So again, the study is a resource and a tool to aid MDT and its partners in determining potential improvements to the corridor. And so the draft corridor study is available currently to you as the public and stakeholders to go take a review and offer comments. And so I will actually turn this over to Lisa now to explain some of the specifics on how you can contribute to the study.
Thanks, Cody. Well, like you've heard over and over today, the public participation is a very key component of any corridor study effort, any planning effort, frankly. And so at this point, we are putting it on your plate to help us to review the document and provide any comment, thoughts that you see fit. Starting today, there is a 30-day comment period. The documents are available on the project website, which is there on the screen. You can provide comments using the comment form on the website, or you can send them directly to Vicky using that contact information that's provided, or use the Q&A function. So at this point, if you have any questions, if you would like elaboration on anything else, yeah, please drop your questions in the Q&A using the speech bubble icon. And right now we don't have any questions in the queue.
And I would just add, Lisa, that it's fairly simple to Google search, MDT West Reserve Drive corridor study, and you should be able to find the link fairly quickly.
That's a great point. And then when you get to the website, there is a link on there that says documents, and that's where the draft study lives. And the nice thing, it's all there. It's a PDF, but it's very user-friendly in that it's keyword searchable. You can kind of flip through, look for what is of interest to you specifically. You don't necessarily need to get entirely into the weeds if you don't want to. All right, we got a question. Mark gets the prize. Would you explain further the access modification you would recommend regarding Countryway? Do you want to take that, Cody?
Sure, I can start with that question. So we do have a recommendation at Countryway. We do understand and have witnessed some of the cut through traffic that you probably have seen. I'm guessing maybe you even live in the neighborhood and are pretty familiar with this. We do know that that's a problem. That is considered a public right of way. And so we aren't able to necessarily restrict those people from making that cut through movement. But we are recommending some additional signage and review of those particular approaches onto West Reserve and also over at Whitefish Stage Road. The right answer here, the long-term answer, is that what we need to focus on is improving capacity on West Reserve Drive. And that's part of our recommendation to go to the 5-lane facility. Ultimately, if there was capacity out on West Reserve Drive, a lot of those people would not choose to drive through that neighborhood. And so essentially we have what I would consider maybe a short-term solution to try to minimize some of that cut through, but then also focus on the longer term of trying to increase that capacity out on West Reserve to get people to make a different decision.
Bob, I've got a question. I think I'm going to send over your direction.
Okay.
Will Countryway be used as a bypass during construction? So two pieces of that, potentially a detour route and also the prospect of construction.
So we're far too early to be able to say yes or no to will detours even be used. One thing I can tell you is that will Countryway be used as a bypass during construction? The honest answer is there's not a doubt in my mind that a lot of people will know that it's there and use it. There's no way that we can stop that. It is a public road. It's currently being used by far more people than what most people would like using it. But as a public road, we can't stop or prohibit legal vehicles from using a legally accessible public road. That being said, we most definitely will not sign it as an official detour either. We will, when we do construction on our roadways, we either build an alternate route or we redirect them to utilize routes that are under MDT's jurisdiction. And I want to go back to the previous question that Cody was talking about as well, and just make sure that to clarify one thing, access control, as Cody you talked about, there's a couple parts to access control. One of them is what are we going to do to control access to existing roads and approaches? But a huge part of access control is making sure that we don't allow future approaches in areas that can cause traffic congestion problems or traffic snarls. So we want to be very strategic in the location of future approaches as roadways are developed, particularly the access onto West Reserve. I think everyone's aware there's a lot of empty acreage on the north side of that road. And we want to make sure that as development occurs, that we do it strategically where we allow access onto West Reserve to prevent future problems.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that clarification, Bob. Another question, Cody, did you do a car count on Country Way? And if so, what were those numbers? Can you speak to that off the cuff?
Sure. So we did not actually count Countryway because it's actually beyond the study boundary. And basically, to explain a little further, so we're looking at essentially the routes that are state routes. Countryway, is a residential street there. It's local. We do know from observations and from information we've gathered from our technical oversight committee, including local traffic folks, and also both actually city and county observations there, that there is an issue. We know that that's a problem. There's numerous accounts of that as well. So we don't have specific data on the number of additional vehicles that are making that movement. It would be very difficult to actually separate and basically parse them out from the rest of the traffic. We do know though that on the current situation, there is an issue with the amount of traffic that's going through Countryway.
Okay, here's one more question about Countryway. Can the Countryway road speed limit be lowered? 25 mile per hour equals 40 to 50 currently. Maybe 15 mile per hour might slow to 25, 30. Bob, do you want to take that?
You bet. Can the Countryway? Absolutely, it can be. But that is a road that is under city jurisdiction. So it's outside of the purview of those of us that are on the call today. That is something that if it's currently posted at 25 miles an hour, the likelihood of having the speed limit reduced is probably not great. That's an adequate and an accurate speed limit for a neighborhood community. But from the follow-up or the second part of the question there, it appears to me that there's an enforcement issue. The speed limit is posted at the right number, but the traffic isn't traveling at the posted speed limit. So I would encourage you to reach out to the city, reach out to the city police department, reach out to your city councilman, and work with them on what you can do in your neighborhood to slow in the county. So if you're in the county, reach out to the county, the sheriff's department, and to the county commissioners on what needs to be done on that particular road. I'm sorry about that. I'm not totally familiar on which roads or who's on out there, other than that they definitely aren't under the jurisdiction of MDT. So I hate to sound like I'm passing the buck, but those local routes are under the jurisdiction, whether it's the city or the county. So that's where the discussion has to start to reduce speed limits. But again, it sounds to me like there's an enforcement issue, not a speed limit issue. And that is a common theme all over the place. We've got a tremendous influx of people and traffic in the valley, and there's only a certain number of law enforcement available.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Even comments related to the content that was provided today are welcome. And of course, they would become a part of the project record and be considered for any modifications to the draft corridor study. And again, the project website, study website, is on the screen there, which is where the draft study is currently living and will be the future home of the final study once that is all finalized. Again, starting today, there will be a 30-day comment period, and then at that point, the document will be finalized. While we wait to see if any other questions or comments come in through the chat function, Vicki, do you want to say anything more? Any parting comments or prompts for participation?
Sure, thank you, Lisa. Thanks to everybody who took time out of their busy schedule and participated with us tonight. We would love to hear from you. And if you could just go out to the website and take a look at the document. There's a lot of really great information, and we would love to get your comments. And if you had anything that's like super specific, we can set up meetings to talk to you about that as well. So thanks again for your time.